Hey everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Indie Game Movement, the podcast that talks about the marketing and business of indie games. I am Andrew Pappas, and I'm going to be your host today, and we're going to be talking about how voice acting shapes the player experience. You know, when it comes to voice acting, a lot of indie developers rule it out before they ever seriously consider it, assuming it's out of reach. But that assumption might be costing them more than the budget they're trying to protect. So today, we're going to explore how voice performance shapes the way players can connect with characters, experience story, and remember your game, and why it's more accessible than most developers realize. So that's what we're going to be talking about right here today on Indie Game Movement. Hey everyone, and we're back, and today with us I have Alexander Brandon. Alex, how's it going? And thank you so much for being here today.
It's going great. Thanks for having me. Looking forward to the chat, to the podcast.
Oh yeah, definitely. Because honestly, this is something I don't think I've ever really covered in detail before. So I'm that's all I'm gonna say for now. But first, Alex, he is the CEO of Funky Rustic. You've been involved with lots of different projects, companies, and stuff. Please share us a little bit about Funky Rustic and maybe some of your past experiences and things that.
Yeah. Well, I mean, even a lot has been happening recently. So, Funky Rustic is essentially me as a company, but it started with me and my ex Jeanette in 2010, and she was handling finances, making good decisions and stuff, and I was the game audio, just on the ground and do the game audio work guy. But yeah, it started after I'd worked with Heatwave Interactive, and that's essentially game audio outsourcing, looking at, and we go in cycles, right? Because you have the moments where people think, oh, man, I'm so tired of doing contract work. It's just a constant hustle. I need something full time to just chill out a little bit. And then maybe it's a great feast of the feast and famine cycle. And then, as we're seeing now over the last 4 years, it becomes awful. And so now we're getting more into the mind of, wait a minute. So that's where Funky Rustic was born, was just for me to be able to provide services wherever, whenever, to vet people that I knew. But a lot of that effort is going into this new group that I'm with, Pacific Standard Creative, which is a division of Pacific Standard Sound. The people at Pacific Standard Sound provided audio for the Odyssey film. And so they wanted to start with, Eric Marks wanted to start a game audio division of that. And He came to me to help. And I'm like, I'm all in, man. That sounds amazing.
Love it.
So yeah, that's where things are at the moment.
Nice. So you're there, but lots of experience with like game audio in general, voice acting, for lots of stuff. So all cool and exciting stuff. And I'm just out of curiosity. We were talking pre-recording. You're like, yeah, lots going on, but busy. When you're not busy, what did you do to unplug?
Everybody says, like, I cook, I hike, I watch Pluribus and wait for the next season. That's a really good question. I don't know exactly. It's kind of random. I do like hiking. Having moved to Seattle, I don't need to, when I step outside in the summer, it's not 1,000 degrees the way it was in Texas because I lived there for a really long time. That's great. I have 3 sons. They've been up here and they love it. We've been to Mount Rainier and a bunch of other spots. Museum of Pop Culture is great here in Seattle.
Nice.
There's a lot of really neat things. I try to read, and it's a lot harder for me than my girlfriend Ariel because she's like always got an audiobook going. So I'm being an audio guy. I'm less into the audiobooks just because I can focus in on the voices. And sometimes the voices are just like, they can be a little irritating, not because I think they're not skilled at what they do and that, oh my gosh, we all need to eat, right? But yeah, I prefer to just read with paper books, not even ebooks, so to speak, although I do have a bunch of those. So yeah, and then it's just it's thinking about the world that we live in, the life in general, just the things that we learned, and of those things that we learned, what still applies from the things that our parents taught us.
Yeah.
How to relate to people. Human technology is like one of my most interesting, just if I'm not on the job, I mean, it relates to the job, right? Because
Yeah, of course.
I'm just like, wait a minute, this last thing, there were people that just didn't feel comfortable talking about stuff. You never want to force anybody to talk about anything, but because we didn't talk about that, like things really went further south, right?
Yeah.
So I love, and that's part of, ages ago I wrote this book, Audio for Games, and a lot of it people say they really like. It's not, I don't even know how much of it is in print. There's probably a digital edition someplace. But a lot of what I wanted to cover there was the human factor and dealing with people in when you get a certain response in meetings, like and you get a feeling from it, what do you do? How do you process it? How do you respond? How do you compromise? I'm sure plenty of people have written about that, but I just don't see it being discussed nearly as much. There, lots of people on Instagram, we see the visual side of people, lots of people on TikTok doing 5-second things. That's not enough time to get into what we're doing. Heck, I mean, just back and forth for however long, getting more deep into discussion about us.
Yeah.
That's, if I wanted to unplug, like, I don't mind. That's where my brain kind of goes. So,
yeah. Think about those things. It's funny because you were saying that. I'm like, I think that way a lot about different things too. It's like, and it's not like, it's weird. It's like sometimes I'll be walking around and be like, like simple things, like I'll be at the grocery store and I interacted with someone and be like, like I got the impression like they felt really good about that. And what was it really? Like sometimes you just nail it right away, and other times like that was interesting. And and I think about that stuff all the time too. It's funny. It's weird, but sometimes
not
I think about
something
more than I think most people do, or I'm weird in that sense, but I'm okay with it.
No, don't think anything about that's weird. We're not taught that in early school years. Like that's not part of the 3 R's. That's a thing that, like, well, I mean, we're hearing a little bit about it now. Social emotional learning was something that was a phrase that I heard maybe 4 or 5 years ago. Maybe it was around for ages before, but it worked its way into the Texas school system. They were talking, especially during COVID, that was a thing that, they brought people in to talk about it. And I thought that was great, but we've only scratched the surface, right? It's not like a critical part of early learning curriculum. And I think it vitally needs to be. There's people that when I tell them that, they're like, oh, I don't know. And I'm like, nope, I'm not backing down from the need to, like, it may be that as a kid, it'll be like all the other stuff that you're like, I don't quite get this math thing. What is up with that? Or like, why am I learning about Albania when I'm 8 or 9 years old or something like that in a history class? Or our own country's history, yes, but like learning about each other should be the first thing. It's just like it
builds strong communication and understanding and all that stuff,
all our soft skills.
Cool. All right, well, I know we digressed a bit, but it was definitely interesting and worthwhile exploring, and I think it brings up a valid point that, I don't know, we should think about more often, I guess. But that said, appreciate you sharing more about that and how you unplug, getting out there and thinking about these things. But we also want to get to know you a little bit more, and how we do that here on the show is through the Q Box. And so today, folks, I have a few quick random questions for Alex. And Alex, are you ready for the Q Box, Ryan?
I'm ready for the Q Box.
All right. First is, what was your childhood favorite game?
Metroid.
Ooh, that's a good one.
Easy.
Man, I haven't played that one in forever.
It still holds up. Yeah.
Next is, what's the most helpful or impactful advice you ever received?
That's a good one. The one that I keep coming back to, and it sounds very generic, but it was my dad. My mom taught me a lot, but my dad taught me a lot too. And it was while he was giving me a driving lesson, and I passed this on to my boys, and my oldest who has a great memory. He brings it back up, and I'm just like, I'm so glad you remember that. And that is, after all of the, turn signal, blah, 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 awareness, etc., above all, relax. Keeping that in mind for so many situations, even other than driving, it has been like the thing that stuck with me a lot. And I'd say it was probably the most impactful. There's probably something more specific industry wise that I could dredge up, stuff that maybe Warren Spector passed along in my early days, or Tim Sweeney, or any of the great studio leads that I've gotten to work with. But that's the one that I remember the most.
I still think, even in that context of the industry, that this is extremely applicable with what you
say. Oh my gosh. Yeah, absolutely.
All right, last but not least, and the staple here on the show is, what game are you playing now?
What game am I playing now? Well, I'm playing a bunch. The two biggest ones that I am playing right now, the ones that are getting the most of my time are, definitely not opposite end of the polls, but just very spread apart in terms of time. Dragon Age Origins and Expedition 33.
Awesome. Two very good ones, too. I know. I mean, I definitely need to get into Expedition 33 at some point.
I recommend it. I haven't played it nearly as much as Dragon Age, and I've barely scratched the surface of Dragon Age. It's, these are massive games that if you uncover every nook and cranny, you can spend hundreds of hours. I don't spend hundreds of hours. I'll walk that back just a tad. If a game really, if a game really grabs you and you can't stop playing, then you just keep playing. Like I played, whether it's Balatro or Balatro, like any chance I could pick that game up, I just kept going. Yeah. I was just like, until I got all the major initial decks, and then it felt a little more repetitive to me.
Yeah.
And I kind of put it down. But yeah, like there's going through the storyline, and so many of the RPG elements have similarities. So it's a little, there's things that over time are more difficult to make new, but are just kind of vital part of the mechanics.
Yeah.
Yep. And so, yeah, I mean, you approach it a completely different way in a Final Fantasy game, and even try to change things up in a big way in the whole Final Fantasy series, et cetera, et cetera. But yeah, I was surprised. There was something a little generic in terms of just how Dragon Age approached, maybe it was their marketing. Maybe I was like, another role-playing game. And I got to admit, like, I had played a lot up until that point. And then I took a big break from role-playing for a while up until, BioShock Infinite, which is not like full-on role-playing game, and it's got its infamy in the industry, right? In terms of how things went with that team. It's very sad, but I'd say that might still be my favorite game of its type. Maybe favorite first-person game would be BioShock Infinite. But Dragon Age has surprised me with sort of a slow build in terms of its story to keep me interested. And Expedition 33 is very similar.
Yeah.
It's like, in fact, it hooked me a little sooner or earlier on with, okay, this is kind of different. And it's not just the art style, even though that's kind of different. It's just like, okay, story-wise, all right.
Yeah.
I'm kind of into this in a way I didn't expect to be.
Nice.
So, yeah.
Definitely good ones. And yeah, thanks for sharing those things and allowing us to get to know you a little bit more. And now, folks, we are going to get into this conversation that, again, as I mentioned before, I don't think I ever covered in such detail until now. And I'm glad that you're the one, Alex, to be doing this here. And that is how voice acting shapes the player experience. I shared it in the intro and everything. And to kick this off, Alex, I'm curious, after working across, many games and genres and all these things, what have you learned about the role voice performances actually play in shaping the player experience?
Whew. Wow. All right. Oddly enough, I think I have a good answer for this. In early days of gaming, there was just the written word, the text that we would see, from games like Zork, where all it is you're picturing that White House in your head, or what does a GRU look like in your head. So over a certain period of time, early to mid 80s, we're thinking, what's a game going to sound like when it talks to you? And I think one of the first ones that did that had speech synthesis, but not, it's amazing how many chips were out that would do what sounded like the actual voice, like the Star Wars arcade game. It sounds like you're actually listening to stuff. And somebody told me that like those weren't actual recordings. And then somebody said, no, they are, and they're digitized. And I'm just like, wait, wasn't it the Pokey chip that somebody used? Maybe it was a Texas Instruments chip. Anyway, in those days, it was like when you heard voice, it was new and cool and unique and engaging in whatever way it was used, just because it was voice, right? So then we, as we progress and we start hearing voice more and more in games, it becomes a bit ubiquitous. It becomes just a thing that's a given in terms of how the games work. And so going from there up until even in Unreal and Unreal Tournament, it's the bare bones of what voices will cue the player for whatever it is. Unreal being a lot more story-based, but it's still, most of what you learn is through text. It's not something that somebody comes up and gives you this big exposition. And then in Unreal Tournament, it mostly deathmatch and capture the flag and all those styles. You get the sound bites of double kill.
Yes,
and all of those.
Those are just playing in my head.
Nice. Yeah. See, you remember those. And Mortal Kombat, get over here. So I've been very lucky. I got to be a Mortal Kombat character. I played a couple of minor roles in the first Deus Ex game, a few more in the second one. And then going to now, and let me use Dragon Age and Clair Obscur as an example of this. There have been people that have said, I think there's too much voice in games now. I think there's, and so the big, there's a couple of big challenges here. And one of them is that there hasn't been, well, let me just say that it's starting. It's just not as ubiquitous as the notion of doing voice in games, but it's the notion or the difficulty of the writing team, the design team, and the audio team working together earlier and doing more iterative stuff outside the game, which is absolutely possible. And then, of course, doing stuff once you're actually in the game, but having that whole thing be like understood as like, this is how the process needs to go. We need to all stick to it, even though it can go back and forth in any number of ways. So with that challenge combined with when you're in a game, with just a couple of very rare exceptions, I think games like The Last of Us and their kind have inspired films and shows to represent, or to be like, hey, we have enough of an emotional story impact out of this to make something linear from something that isn't linear. But the other way around, and it sounds as though it's disparaging or just maybe trying to get attention. It is the opposite of that. It's like I got to play some games. I get to play as a judge for Best Mix in the Game Audio Network Guild Awards. And when I'm lucky enough to go to GDC, we all meet and we go through what we think about the nominees. And for last year, one of those nominees was Indiana Jones and the Great Circle. And it felt like being in an indie movie, but it also didn't feel like being in an indie movie, if you know what I mean. It's, was it Troy Baker that did the VO? I mean, he sounded, so much like Harrison Ford in that and what he does. And he did such a great job. The animators did an amazing job. The environment, Gordy Hobb always nails it, being able to like, oh my gosh, it's like Williams wrote this himself, So all of those pieces were there. But Uncanny Valley is just one example. And the pacing of who says what and when.
Yep.
Cinematics to in-game to, just pseudo cinematics, whatever you want to call it. All of those things like have not made a game experience where we go through it and we're just like, oh my gosh, it's like I'm in something that is as impactful as Breaking Bad or Better Call Saul, except I'm playing it, right?
Yeah.
We're not there.
Yep.
We're not even remotely there. Now, unless we push and we try to get there, we won't get there. And unfortunately, to get there, I really do believe a lot of money is going to have to be spent to at least hone a process that maybe gets easier eventually.
Yeah.
But no, so that's my thought. It's like every single moment that uses voice, you need to make sure that voice hits just as effectively as a piece of artwork or a game mechanic. And I don't think we do enough of that. I think we do more we write the words. Okay, we're just going to go into the studio. No. We need to do our table reads. We need to bring in the actors for this. AI be damned. And I'm in charge of an AI working group and I say something like that, right? There are conceptual processes that AI does a great job of helping out. I think that could be a part of the pipeline in terms of prep, in terms of like, hey, if it's going to be way too much to bring actors back over and over again, and I'm sorry, I'm getting a little bit far off topic here, but like, well, maybe not. If you're in a state where you're an MMO and the game needs to react to something and make someone say something and write a line in real time and create voiceover in real time, what else is going to do that other than AI, right? Like, and so, I know my colleagues at SAG-AFTRA are screaming at the podcast right now, but that's an inescapable reality. What you do is you bring in an actor for a really, really good rate. And the rates can all be negotiated for a core set of stuff, and then the AI generates the rest, right? You make it worth their while, but then you explain. It's just like the game is just going to do all this in real time. The writer isn't going to write while every player is playing the game about what the weather is where they are. So yeah. Anyway, with examples like that as an aside, it's still the performance and the writing that are just at the core of everything.
Yeah.
And we're not spending enough time on that. I realize it's very, very difficult to do, and that people are trying, honestly, their level best to do that.
Well, yeah. And I think what's important too, because you provided some examples around this and everything else, but it's really that relationship you're talking about, the writing, the direction, voice direction, even music and sound design, right? That are all coming together to crafting these memorable scenes. Now, what I want to get into, though, I'm curious about too, as we're, talking more about voice acting and the impact and stuff. Let's say for smaller teams, indies and studios, small studios, where does voice acting provide the biggest return on investment for improving, let's say, that player immersion? Because we talked about how it can create and craft memorable moments, but where's that return on investment? Is there one, or do we have to look at it in a different way? Because I know some people might be scrutinizing us about this craft and stuff.
Yeah. No, you're absolutely right. So there's being able to put people in the moment in terms of just like, okay, we want to have moments in games that you can't distinguish from anything film or TV based. And film and TV are constantly trying to be like, how do we bring in more people, because we're losing money. There's streaming. There's trying to get people into the theaters. For the indie groups, I'm amazed. I don't know how people do this. Well, I mean, I kind of do. There's people that will approach me and say, hey man, I'm doing for example, Brenna Wilkes coordinated a Castlevania album like 5 years ago based on Castlevania The Adventure 2 or Belmont's Revenge for the Game Boy. I have great memories about that game and how frustrating it was. I never made it that far in it, but I loved the music. I grabbed the tracks and put them on a tape or whatever it was that I did. And so I was like, oh man, yeah, I'd love to do this. And she organized it in a way. It's just like, yeah, nobody got paid up front as far as I know. But then the album came out, and then we get like a cut because it gets put out on Bandcamp and the streaming services, and you get like 2 cents every. But that's an example of indie stuff. There's been people that I've seen that have put together projects that are just out of love, and people get voice actors, people get singers, people get live music instrumentalists, and they wrangle these people to around a common inspiration. Now, as far as that goes, I think just as much information should be shared with independent groups as with the AAA folks in terms of process. And that does mean, a thing that I don't think I've preached as much about. Oddly enough, Zawan did post the 7 sins of voice acting that was posted on social media a while back. And he said, what are some big issues? And one of them is that I'm pretty sure I put up there was table reads. Getting a script together, figuring out how that script relates to what you're telling the player about. Is this to drive the story? And of course, a game with the player influencing the story, it's like you need the equivalent of 10 script writers in terms of, and I'm sure there's games that have had 10 script writers plus. Scoping down, no matter what, is maybe rule 1 is okay, we want to do a Final Fantasy fan game. It's just okay, great. Well, you realize that if it's a Final Fantasy fan game and it's 2D and it's SNES, you don't really need VO. You can have little, these little sims is I think the maybe it's an outdated term now, but the stuff that the Sims use and say the noises that they make, that was an ingenious idea. You don't need localization to pay people to do eFigs, English, French, Italian, German, Spanish, and there's a lot more.
Nintendo's a great example too of that.
Yes, very, very true. They're just it doesn't matter who plays this. We shouldn't need a specific language for it. that's one example of saving time. But then there's looking at every time you want some kind of a vocalization, and like, what are we telling the player? Is it a story-based thing? Is it something where we're like, we want to move the story along, we want to have an emotional impact, we want to gradually build this, or we want to create a sense of that, we want to, et cetera. And so, yeah, and so many games that are being born out of just environments like backrooms. You don't need hardly any voice for something like that, and it instills this automatic, where you are, and you don't, and you do, right? It's just like, it's weird. You want to figure it out, and
I mean,
go ahead.
That might get into like sound effects a little bit though, but there's still this component of immersion, and I think if we were to like pin it on like return on investment, I don't think it's anything we can directly equate to dollar signs, right? Or wish lists or anything. And think about it this way: if we take apart every aspect of a game, visual effects, sound effects, everything else, right? It's accumulation of all those things that enhance the immersion. And I think a lot of us out listening as players ourselves, we pay attention to those details. And when we see those little details or we hear those little things, we pick up on it. And like, sometimes it's like, oh, wow, that was really cool. And that's just like notching you a little bit further down into that immersion, into that experience. And then it's those little things that maybe we identify or we feel and not realize. It creates all these emotions. And that is where that return on investment happens, because now it's creating those memorable moments. We're talking about them, and there you go. But that's my take.
Right. I was going to say, it's along the spectrum.
Yeah.
Of games, and it depends. Are you going for immersion? Is there immersion in Balatro? Not really. It's like you're presented with rules and some pretty things and some sounds that respond, and a single piece of music. It's kind of cool that oddly enough I turned off after a certain point. And then you have the games that are like first person, like, oh, what's the name of that one? I'm looking at my desktop about. Gosh, what's the ghost hunting game? I can never pronounce it right.
Phasmophobia?
It's not Phasmophobia, right? Yeah.
That's one of them.
there's more than one. So yeah, Phasmophobia. I played that with Nicholas. That's my oldest. He's like, hey, let's play some Phasmophobia. And I had a bit of a sense of immersion about that. It does, it doesn't have the most realistic textures and lighting and all of those things, but in a way, you can point to Lethal Company. And there's scary moments in Lethal Company with, incredibly simplified artwork, right?
Yeah.
But the technique there that I hadn't, it's been around a really long time in terms of having localized player voices, right? Mm-hmm. Like when you've got a multiplayer experience and you've got somebody talking and you distance them and you do the right fall offs and the curves and, there's certain prioritizations that happen in huge rapid paced multiplayer scenarios. I'm sure Marathon worked very hard on that, but even in Lethal Company, it's just sort of like, I kind of feel like I am here, despite I see this little cartoony looking figure walking around with me. And I'm just as scared of that creature. So you can get away with a lot, but remember, the voice is the voice that you're hearing from a real person.
Yeah.
It's not something that is written on a page and then spoken later on. And then presented in a certain way, or maybe repeated, right? That's a completely different situation.
Yeah. I'm curious too, because we talked about this and clearly what the value is associated with this. If there are people that are thinking of, all right, maybe I have a narrative story, I have other elements that I think could really amplify the experience I'm going for. If they're planning on or thinking about including voice acting, and let's say it's their first time, right? Because they've never done it before. Is there any advice that you give them to make sure that ultimately it just strengthens that experience?
Really good question. So it's important for anybody that's getting into, okay, I want to get on Discord. I want to rally my troops, get a team together, and let's make something, right? There's whether it's let's use my inheritance money to do it. Let's max out a bunch of credit cards. There's people that are still just pouring their creative hearts and souls into these projects. Now, important to know that when you just get people into a game and you want to publish the game and you call yourself an independent studio, the typical way to go that people just are just like, okay, this is how we're going to do it. We're going to do it all with some friends that we bring on, and we maybe audition and we record, and then we put it in the game, and it's going to sound great. That is known as a non-union process, right? And there's this whole union, non-union question that I get asked all the time, which is unfortunate. It's very unfortunate. And what does that mean to me? That means that SAG-AFTRA, hello, Sean Astin. He's got his struggles with AI. I got to give it to him. He's going to Congress and speaking and doing all this stuff, right? Like I support and applaud his efforts to try to protect the people in the union. But having said that, there's challenges. And what I mean by that is that the union really wants everybody to just join,
Yes.
right?
Yep.
And just be like, if you're not in, we can't protect you. We you're not covered under the rules that enable us to make sure you get paid, to make sure that if you're a steady working voice actor, which people that do these independent projects are almost never a steady working voice actor. I'm not a steady working voice actor. I do voices that I put out on social media. I've done stuff for Skyrim, Mortal Kombat. I have not earned the amount necessary to earn a pension or health or any of the benefits, right? So there's a catch-22 that like just getting voice acting jobs goes against the notion of that. But what I mean by getting back to what the unions want is they want independent people because they have, I don't know if they have a specific indie rate, but I know that they do have rates that they have done their best to say like, okay, you don't pay as much, but you still count it as a union project and everything's all above board and all of that sort of thing. I don't think that there's been enough work done, which I get it. It's not like it's super easy to just, put all this in legal stuff and pay lawyers thousands of dollars to make it all work, right? Because it's all from the ground up, like you're covered, right? But like I don't think enough work has been done to engage independent voice actors, be able to say, we've got a whole path for you. This is your path. You don't get retirement. Yeah, how could you? You're earning a few $100s here, a few $100s there, but that's fine. This is still how this exists as a union project. I could very well be misrepresenting. Maybe there is a path, but but what it shows is a lack of marketing and messaging, which is true for many people. And that's your area of expertise, I believe.
Yep.
I'm not saying that, you have anything to do with SAG-AFTRA's messaging, but like, they're not presenting themselves as like, hey, we're here to help everyone. And here's exactly how, because if someone like me asks questions about like, I did work on like 5 or 6 really big games. Skyrim's been re-released 11 times. I don't see additional money once a re-release goes out. Well, go ahead. I'm sorry.
No, that's okay. I think you bring up an
interesting
point because I phrased this earlier in some ways where, okay, but what's the point of it? And at the bottom line, if we distill it, like people are like, we know there's a lot of cost there, right? And where is that fear and concern coming from? And it sounds like, there's probably lots of contributors, but it's also at a systemic issue, it sounds like, stemming from like SAG and everything else. And I know there's like, it's different space, but like SAG indie, but still, it still represents the same thing, essentially. And what's happening is there's this concern and fear around it. So it's interesting because here we are talking about, bottom line, return on investment. And it's like, we can kind of see that stemming there. But let's say it's an interesting perspective and view, but let's open this up a little bit broader where, okay, we understand there's things. Let's kind of like get over some of these fears. And they're legitimate concerns and fears that we have in those areas. But when we are getting into this or considering it, what else are ways we could, because let's face it, let's say you could get a decent mic. The mic I'm using, people say I sound great. It's cost me $60. So let's say we get friends involved and everything else. We don't know much. Maybe that's not the best way. Maybe there's other ways to do it. But like when we're looking at strengthen that experience. And Getting off onto the union thing, I think it's important that people are aware of that. Absolutely.
There are resources that I can certainly share that maybe you can post or something like that, just says like, here's how you keep yourself informed. Understand that the union tries, right? They're not this evil thing. entity. We worked with them on Stormgate. They were very accommodating for a variety of situations. But there was still more money on that project than there is on any independent project, right? So for an independent project, like usually like what I see, that again, it's heartwarming, it's amazing. We wish these people could be paid more for their time. But yes, there is very low barrier to entry. You can get, free or extremely cheap software. You can get extremely cheap mics on Reverb that are like, a used Neumann, is can be a few $100s, and it'll get you a great sound. There's technique, of course. The room that I'm in right now has some treatment in it, but there's other things, like I've got a chaotic eyeball over there. I do stress that it's almost impossible to, like, the whole room within a room, like you can put a box around your mic with padding on it and that'll solve your problem. Not really. It's much better to just go into a closet with clothes in it to get a better sound. With a portable recorder, right? There's all kinds of techniques that people can use.
Bookshelves with lots of books on them can serve as a treatment source, for example.
It can help for sure. Yeah. And that's just the recording part, right?
Yeah.
Then there's the getting together with who's writing the dialogue, making sure that you really make sure that they're reading things out loud when they write them, if they're spoken, and that you get a bunch of people together, even if they're not the people you want to do the acting, to just run through the lines, just like, don't be afraid of just like, okay, here's what happens here. Here's this. Put some temp dialogue in during real-time gameplay scenarios where you need to hear barks or whatever, the kinds of lines that just are one-offs, right? Just keep iterating on, and it's true for music, it's true for sound effects, it's true for art. Until you get it right, you just keep banging away at it. And a lot of people assume it's like, once we record our lines, we're done. Oh my gosh, that was such an effort. We were here for an hour doing a whole bunch of expository dialogue or barks or whatever it is, and my throat hurts. Oh boy, we don't have to do that again. I beg to differ. It is, you'd be surprised how many times people, including myself, have just been like, okay, we've done those sessions and we paid a whole bunch of money, spent a whole bunch of time, and we don't have to do that again. Then we get into the game where we're just like, oh my God.
It's important. It's a good point, because one thing I'm thinking is, even in these processes and stuff, as simple as they can be, it still comes down to intent, right? What we were talking about before. And then the other part is, think about how you're making your game. Whether you have voice acting or not, do you just like make the game in a bubble? You never put it out there, never put out a demo or whatever, and then you launch it. No, because you have no clue how that's going to sit with your audience or anything, or players.
Very true.
So it's, even though, like, it's funny though how some of these things, such as like voice acting that we're talking about now, it would be like you're saying, like, you wouldn't use that example if it didn't happen probably regularly. We're like, all right, we did our recordings, so let's throw it in and stuff. It's like anything, it is an iterative process and stuff with all the departments and everything.
Yep. You mentioned whether you need voice, a game that just came out 2 days ago, Atomcraft, ATOM Craft, by Triple Jump, is a sandbox, literally, game where like every pixel is manipulatable. It's got chemical reactions, no voice at all. No voice, and it's tons of fun. And so I really stress that, like, look at the style that you're going for. There can be pixely Metroidvania games that can have bits of voices here and there. Symphony of the Night, for example, right? I mean, it's got some voice that kind of works, like Alucard, and you've got some voice that's just sort of campy. Thank you.
Oh,
yeah. And so looking at that, again, some people are like, game developers tend to be of the mind, especially, back in that period of time, and then even moving forward, where, hey, that's kind of cute. I got a little laugh out of that in the midst of, but exactly like you said, hey, wait a minute. Let's actually look at that in context. Like, I'm running across a roof and Medusa heads are approaching, and okay, there's enough of the silliness to where a silly voice is fine in Castlevania. But what about the moments where we want people to be more seriously, emotionally affected by Alucard and his dad having a conversation, and that sort of thing?
Because
looking at it that way, I think goes to intent based on what you're saying.
And
Yeah.
what you're calling out there too, I think is really important to call out too, that with intent, it's also it's important to look at what's going on, because let's say you have the overall right intent approach to wanting to incorporate voice acting, but voices themselves or sound effects can be just as helpful as they can be counter helpful, as in an
Absolutely.
absolute distraction. And if they
Yep.
if they create that level of friction, you're doing the opposite of creating immersion.
Yeah. There's there's an ancient site that I still think exists, if I can look it up. audioatrocities.com.
That sounds like fun.
If you haven't checked it out, oh yeah, it's covered with ads now, but it is
Slowing down
a
his
great
signal because
example.
there's so many ads.
It is, yeah, it is great. It is a great example of some terrible voice acting examples in games. There's a quick interesting story. I've never worked with a director from Japan on voice. I've been lucky enough to do some work at Retro, and that was amazing. But it was in Austin with a primarily U.S. team. And so, but the stories that I would hear from colleagues would be, and it could be true for anime, it could be true for games. There's English words written on a page, and there's been cases where a U.S. Or whoever, an English-speaking voice actor, will be speaking these lines, and the director from Japan, I'm not pointing out just Japan, it could be maybe there's another country that does this, but in one of the examples on Audio Atrocities, the guy, instead of saying stingy, STINGY,
Yep.
he says stingy.
Yep.
And there's been cases where the actor will go, actually, this is how it's pronounced. But the Japanese director will be like, nope, you read it this way.
Oh, yeah,
and that's how it gets released.
Yeah.
Isn't that amazing?
Yeah.
That, like, you know, there's cases where you're trying to get the context right, and you're like, and, you know, like, so, but actors may not have the wherewithal to say, do you want people to laugh at your game? Because that, I'm just trying to make sure that, like, you know, this is a serious thing that you're doing in terms of this line of dialogue that I'm speaking, because that's the way it's felt for the rest of the game. And all of a sudden we mispronounce this word in a very obvious way. Your US audience will laugh. Like, if that is what you want, I will be happy to pronounce it that way.
It's funny because I remember, was it Final Fantasy 12? I think it is. I had to double check and question myself, but in it they pronounce it the Marquis, which I think it's the Marquis.
Oh no!
Yeah.
Really? Okay.
It threw me off. Like, I think when I first played it, I didn't care or think anything of it, and then later, and I played it later, I'm like, wait, what? Okay. I'm like, anyways, there's that.
That's obviously how it shipped. Not only did it happen in the session, it happened when whoever it was that made that moment in the game design wise tested it. It happened when QA tested it.
Yeah.
Why?
Yeah.
Was it missed so many times?
But anyways, but good examples there and stuff about those things, and also answers a lot of thoughts I had when my son's watching One Piece and I'm looking at having him watch it in the original language, and I see the translation. I'm like, they are not saying any of those words and things like that. But anyways, it's interesting. Okay, so we talked about, hey, if you're interested in wanting to do voice acting and considering it for a project, and hey, here are some easy, accessible ways to go about doing it. But let's say for those of us who are interested but kind of want to kick it up a notch, go to the next level, go a little bit deeper, right? Get more involved. When they're getting involved, how do they go about to really, like, bringing life to their characters, to communicate kind of like more of that emotional tent, whether they're working directly with actors or even if it's themselves serving as actors? Because, you know, I'm assuming, you know, a lot of us indies out there and stuff, we're working with limited resources, but we still have enough to go to that next level. What is it that we can communicate or direct and understand how we can really create that emotional impact?
So there's the directing aspect of it, but that it starts long before that. It's important to recognize that whatever system you end up using for integrating voice into a game means that any line that gets generated should ideally have a file name associated with it. And that can be a little difficult to bring online. Now, I'm not going to say if it seems like it's daunting, just automatically fall on Claude or AI to do it for you. But if you reach a stuck point with scripting in an engine like Unreal or Unity in order to create something like that, there are game teams that have made entire tools. Obsidian has done it. BioWare has done it. Just about any major tree-based set of lines for any project needs a system that says like, okay, the designers or the writers / designers determined that voice is needed in a bark situation in real time or in a story driven moment in game and a story driven moment in cinematics. Like those are very basic things that have been around forever, right? And there's that's a whole spectrum where you can have part player control or whatever, and you decide those factors with the designers, but make sure you keep that system in mind, because at the beginning of a project, if it's just writing lines and then trying to keep track of them using a Google sheet and then trying to trace things back to other stuff, like it can become a nightmare pretty fast, depending on the number of lines that you have. If there's 10 lines in the whole game, it's usually not that big a deal. But if we're talking emotional impact, then that kind of means that it has a bit more of a deep story to it. It has some aspect of player choice that informs that story and and getting into characters and how we feel about those characters. So that's one point. Another point is character sheets. Make sure that when you define your characters, to come up with like, okay, this is a preconceived notion I have based on a film that I saw. And then you use that as a reference and you say, okay, I want them to have a grizzled voice and they're in their 50s and they're male and they're this, right? And here's this example, here's this reference. It's important to have those things as potential starting points. It helps with auditions, but you want to create original characters, right? Yeah. I kind of like that in Expedition 33. Like my character, why am I forgetting the name already? Looks like Robert Pattinson, but sounds like, the actor that played Daredevil, because that's the actor that they used. I like that that's a combination, that they weren't like, because in so many games, like it'll be like, if their voice is this, we talked about this on Stormgate, because Simu Liu, who plays Shang-Chi in the Marvel film, is a huge StarCraft fan. And he was like, can I be one of your characters? We're like, of course you can be one of our characters. And we were just like, but we want people to kind of recognize him. And the character ended up having almost a baby face because he's this huge demonic, race that he's representing. And they were like, but let's combine that with Simu Liu. And it did not work. It was not a good idea, right? So you want your characters to have lives of their own. You want them to maybe start at reference points, and then you want them to grow, and you want whoever is acting with them to be given these scenarios as much as possible. Like provide your actors with all the dialogue, all the story, all the backstory, have them immerse themselves in it. And then that just informs the part that much more. So all of these things are things that happen in film as well. There's some actors, they're just, I want to show up, I want to just be given my lines, give me the reference, and I'll just go with it, and we'll either nail it or we won't. And some of them want to know everything. Harry Dean Stanton in Alien was just like, Ridley Scott had given me this, who my parents were and how long I'd been working for the company, and I really liked that. I thought that, so some actors like it and some of them don't, but it's just good to do it no matter what, because when there's contextual stuff that happens in the game, which is important during a directing session, to bring that emotion out, if they already know all that stuff, that's going to be part of who they embody, who they become. So, yeah.
That's so important, too, because I as you're saying that, I could see how, with that example, too, that we were sharing a moment ago about how, hey, they had this clear vision and distinct. And sometimes we look at that as that's a good, solid thing to have, this clarity behind something, and it's very specific and following through. But what we're also doing here is it's a form of art. And what you described, it sounded like the end result almost was not genuine, didn't come off as being authentic, and in a lot of ways could be looked at as contrived in some instances, like forced, that we were trying to create something this way, and it's like, this isn't working. And as you were saying, if you really are going for that emotional impact, then to align with everything else that you're creating from an immersion perspective and creating that experience, it kind of has to, like, there's obviously still structure to it, but it still has to kind of evolve and develop in something on its own too, as a result of the process. Because otherwise,
yes,
you could get something that looks completely, like I said, it's not original. People pick up on it, and then what you're going for is immersion. Again, is just a worse distraction.
and immersion today is not immersion into even 2005, 2006, right? I got some honest feedback on a project. I'm doing that thing where I'm, I don't want to name names actually, but there was a voice director that was nervous about giving me, hesitant, let's just say, about giving me feedback on the nature of the lines that the actors had to do. And he said, this sounds, if you're going for something to really engage players these days, they've come a long way since this game that was released in 2005, 2006. And he gave references for TV shows like The Expanse.
Oh,
right?
Yep.
Yeah, a great show. But like you look at whether it's The Expanse or whether it's Breaking Bad, like, man, pacing and timing and just like, and working those things into the dialogue that doesn't make it like it's just this written sentence that somebody just wrote and you're reading it like, you've got to have and some people can say, oh, it's conversational tone. Well, sometimes it's not conversational tone. Sometimes somebody is in a very stressful situation and they're yelling something and you still got to make it realistic. Look at what I just did. Realistic, right? Like you've got to build those things into the script.
Yeah.
And in some cases you have to give people context and have them come up with stuff in terms of actually acting the part and saying, oh my gosh, you said, and I didn't have that in the script. And that sounds perfect for the actual delivery. Right.
Yeah.
So it's a balancing act. It's sort of going back and forth with just like, okay, in some cases we need to be super strict. In other cases, we redo the script and we rewrite the line because the actor absolutely nailed it with that particular take. But yeah, it's emotional impact / intent / immersion is all really, and I believe that just takes more iteration. That goes towards where in the old days, you'd have a 30,000, Invisible War, I think, had 30,000 lines of dialogue. And that's small by today's standards. Yeah. Like I'd be surprised if the Spider-Man games didn't have 50 or 100,000 lines, just with a lot of them being just environmental, just because of how living and breathing the New York City is. So, it gets harder, but it's good because like when you do have a moment where you go by, you're swinging by somebody in New York and they go just like, what? Wait, oh my, that was, instead of that was Spider-Man, from that would have been expected in, 20 years ago. And it's not. It's like we want to sort of compress that differentiation between, okay, player signaling for signaling's sake, which is little more than a UI sound, a little beep that just indicates to the player something's going on. And that's very, very big in real-time strategy, by the way. And so realistic or so conversational that it's just like, okay, now I'm in actual reality and it's not elevating me as an experience, right?
Yeah.
It's a very challenging set of rocks to sail between, so to speak.
Definitely, because it's always shifting, it's dynamic, and you really need to understand where exactly you are in navigating those rocks, because otherwise, if you just do a straight path, it's not going to cut it.
Yeah, but like a lot of indie games, like just to sort of maybe come back a bit, a lot of indie games are rightly so. The games for Syrian by Falcom. And it's I think the same people did like the East Adventures, like brilliant teams just making really good role-playing games, JRPGs. And for Sorcerian, they had a cool RPG thing where your characters would age. And it wasn't real time, but it was close to it, so that, well, maybe not close to it. It could be weeks and months of just steady play before like one of your characters would die. And there were stories coming back that players would cry when that happened. And, because they'd become attached to their characters and they were immersed in a, cheesy though it might have been, storyline. Yep. And so when I look at independent games these days, you can get a lot of bang for your buck without necessarily going full expanse with voice acting and story. since so many games, they're just like, let's make it easy. Let's make it a 90s Super Nintendo style game. You can work even with voice, you can work in a ton of connection, and you can make it not exactly like Final Fantasy from that era. You can, in fact, I think there's some good examples of that. What am I thinking about? Alabaster Dawn and Crosscode. I can't remember the team. If you haven't played those games and you are a JRPG fan, especially classic JRPGs, those two, and particularly Crosscode, are like the best like modern pixel JRPG games I've ever played. They have really cool storylines. Not necessarily, and I don't think there's any voice in those. But anyway, yeah.
But I think a great takeaway here is just there's lots to consider, and not only that it's within your means, but it's also something that we don't necessarily need or have to overcomplicate either. Like, because as you were just finishing right there, sometimes, and I think that's one of the wonderful things about indie games is they look at things differently. They're done with a different type of energy, and they can also be extremely simple. How many times did you reference Balatro? And we all know how simple that is, in such a unique and different take on a similar basic concept, right? So,
and how many dozens, if not hundreds, of games may well have a similar hook that we haven't played for whatever reason, that just haven't been as successful.
Yeah.
So that's
So, but it's really interesting to kind of explore that too, and sometimes, and why we're even here today, Alex, talking about this, was because I personally feel that this area doesn't necessarily, and I could be wrong, I could just be in my own bubble to an extent, but that voiceover and the consideration put into it doesn't extend beyond as much as we put into other aspects of the development process and what it can really do. So, with you being here today, definitely appreciate your insights and everything else. Hey, if there was like one quick takeaway that you could give from our conversation today for people listening, what would you call out specifically?
I would say, and this came to me a little bit earlier in the stuff that you were saying, it is wonderful that so many people have not given up hope despite the doom and gloom of 30,000 games, 40,000 games, however, released a year. There's no way to get noticed because everybody's doing it. You've got a 0.something% chance. I think it's great that some people are like, I don't care, I'm just going to do this. More and more tools are being made and getting released and getting honed, even though it still feels like in some cases we're in the Stone Age. That does make that process easier. And I am happy for people that, maybe not, hey, I had a prompt and I said, make me an RPG, right? Like, not that. But so the takeaway the takeaway is that, plus today's independent games are tomorrow's AAAs. That's, maybe 20 years from now or something like that. But we see teams like, the Hades folks, is it Supergiant? Right?
Hades, yes.
Yeah. And Darren Korb and the folks there, doing Bastion, I think that was 15 at least years ago, something like that. And finding great success. And I want more of that for more teams. Yeah. So yes. And don't be afraid of like taking a look at VO. The more intimidated you are, the more you can just reach out on Discord, just asking questions. You'll get just as many people, like, especially if you just throw something out on social media. I highly encourage Discord as a means of just being serious about doing anything. Yeah. Like social media, I think you're more of an expert on this, but like it's a place to, blast things, be noticed, maybe bring some stuff in, maybe gain a little bit more of an audience. In terms of anything deeper than essentially just, scrolling billboards, don't count on it as something where you want like, oh, I need genuine feedback on this. The Triple Jump people, or actually Henry, who developed Atomcraft, created a Discord channel for all the the early access players.
Yeah.
And he was just like, oh, give me the feedback. And yes, there will be people that will say, this sucks, right? Just be like, let's get more constructive with our feedback.
Yeah, it's a conversation.
But yeah. So all of that, I think, with the community building tools and the game making tools, it's more awesome than ever in terms of just being able to make something. And I'm glad that people are, despite the signs, not the signs, the actual events in the industry that are awful going on. So yeah. And so voice is possible. There's people that know about it. I mean, I've got my own Discord channel called Funky Rustic. You can hop on there and ask me something if you want.
Awesome.
Anytime.
So in addition to the Discord, how else can people reach out to you, learn more about Funky Rustic? Drop us some links.
Thank you. FunkyRustic.net is the website. There's a contact form on there. I'm on Instagram. I'm on X. I'm on Blue Sky. It'll say either Funky Rustic or Alexander Brandon, and you can just drop me a comment. I'm pretty sure DMs are fairly open. Sometimes I don't respond to everything, but yeah, I really like hearing from people that have questions about anything audio wise or game wise. Yeah.
Excellent. Alex, it's been a pleasure. Really appreciate your insights and what you shared with us today.
Thanks so much for having me. This has been awesome.
Hey everyone, thank you for listening to another episode of Indie Game Movement. I'm Andrew Pappas, your host, and the show's producer is Mustafa Price. Show notes for this episode can be found by visiting rengenmarketing.com, the number episode of the show. Rengen Marketing is a consulting marketing company that helps indie devs with their marketing efforts. Whether you need guidance with your game's marketing strategy or could use a free marketing plan template, then please visit www.rengenmarketing.com and take action. A special thanks to Dakota Saw for Season 2's opening theme and Melissa Gellis for the new logo design. And as always, thanks for being such great listeners, and we'll see you next time on Indie Game Movement.